The Galactic Empire had always believed that Earth was nothing more than a small and unimportant world, circling a yellow star at the edge of the galaxy. Their fleets had crossed countless borders, burned through civilizations, and bent entire systems to their will. To them, humanity was late to the stars, primitive in comparison and destined to bow down the same way others had done before. Yet as their massive armadas approached the boundary of Sul, something unexpected happened that began to unsettle even the most confident commanders. On the forward bridge of the Imperial flagship, screens lit up with a sudden burst of light. An unknown transmission had pierced their encrypted channels. No one had granted clearance. No one had invited this interruption. Yet the message forced its way into every communication line across the fleet. The voice that spoke was cold, sharp, and full of authority. It did not carry the accent of any alien species known to the Council. It was human. By order of the Terran High Command, the voice declared, the Empire is forbidden to enter the realm of Terran space. Turn back now. This is your last warning. The bridge officers exchanged nervous glances. At first, a few laughed bitterly, dismissing it as a childish bluff. The Admiral himself smirked and leaned back in his chair, convinced that the humans were playing at war with toys. But the longer the silence stretched after the warning, the more it weighed on everyone's chest. The signal had not been blocked, traced, or intercepted. It had cut through the strongest military firewalls in the galaxy without effort. The Admiral ordered the communications officer to shut the transmission down. The officer attempted to comply, fingers moving swiftly over the console, but the message continued to echo. It repeated only once the same words, each syllable sharper than the last. Then it vanished, leaving the bridge filled with the faint hum of machinery and the unsettled breathing of soldiers who suddenly no longer felt as secure as before. Empire doctrine demanded strength, demanded that no threat should go unanswered. The Admiral rose from his seat and gave a simple command: advance. The fleets moved forward, thousands of warships sliding across the void. Their confidence returned for a moment. After all, they had conquered far greater civilizations. They had burned through systems guarded by weapons that dwarfed anything humanity could have built. Yet the unease lingered, a shadow clinging to the edges of their pride. The border of Sol system was marked by nothing but empty space, and still, as the first wave crossed, something strange occurred. Navigation systems flickered. Sensors that had never failed in centuries of use began to return impossible readings. Some showed distances stretching into infinity. Others folded in on themselves as if the ships were sailing in circles. The fleet's captains shouted orders, recalibrated their systems, and demanded answers from their engineers. Yet all they received were errors. For the first time in living memory, the Empire's technology was no longer flawless. The space they entered was not empty. It was prepared. Then came the silence. Entire squadrons reported sudden drops in communication. Ships that had been visible on tactical displays a moment ago vanished without trace. No explosions, no debris, no signals of distress. They were simply gone. The admirals demanded explanations, but no one had any. Panic spread quietly across lower ranks, though discipline forced them to remain still. One captain whispered to his crew that the humans had drawn a line in the stars, and that the fleet had crossed it. His words carried fear that no one wanted to admit out loud. From a distant observation deck on one of the smaller destroyers, a young officer stared into the darkness. He thought he saw movement, shadows shifting where none should exist. Then he realized they were not shadows at all. They were ships, Terran ships. Sleek, sharp, and silent, they hovered just beyond the reach of sensors, as if they had been there long before the Empire arrived. The humans had not built warships to match the Empire's size. They had built predators. Their design was different from anything the galaxy had seen. Angular, black, moving like hunters in deep waters. They did not broadcast their presence. They did not announce themselves. They waited, patient and cold. The Admiral ordered a full scan, but the sensors again failed. Only the human ships seemed immune to distortion. For every Imperial ship that searched, 3 Terran vessels stared back unseen. The realization struck hard: this was no bluff. Humanity had grown silent, hidden, and strong in ways the Empire had not predicted. The warning message replayed once more, uninvited. The same voice, calm and merciless. This is your last warning. This time no one laughed. The admirals debated quickly across encrypted channels, their voices tight with anger and fear. Some demanded retreat to regroup, others pushed forward to preserve the honor of the Empire. Pride clashed with survival, and the fleet stalled, caught in indecision. Out in the black, Terran ships continued to circle like wolves around prey. Their engines burned no brighter than stars, their movements were measured, and their presence whispered of power that the galaxy had never respected until now. For centuries, the Empire had defined itself as unchallenged masters of space. But in that moment, standing at the edge of Earth's realm, they were forced to face something they had never encountered before. Not weakness, not defiance, but absolute confidence from a people who should have been nothing. The humans had spoken, and the galaxy would soon learn what it meant when Earth declared a warning, the last warning. The Empire had crossed the boundary of Sol and expected resistance to crumble like paper in fire. But what they found instead was confusion. The most advanced navigation systems in the galaxy flickered, distorted, and spat out nonsense as if they had been reduced to toys. Officers who had once trusted their machines more than their own instincts now stared at broken screens with cold sweat dripping down their temples. The stars outside seemed to twist, maps redrew themselves in impossible shapes, and distances that should have been constant stretched like elastic. The admiral of the Imperial fleet demanded explanations. Engineers tore apart their consoles, shouting that nothing like this had ever been recorded before. They claimed the interference was artificial, too perfect to be natural. Someone had designed this distortion. Someone had crafted it for this very border. That someone was human. The words cut through the Empire like a blade because the humans were not supposed to be capable of such mastery. They had only been spacefaring for a few centuries. Yet the evidence was impossible to deny. On the edges of the fleet, lone destroyers began reporting contact. Not attacks, not explosions, but sightings. Shadows glided across their vision. Ships that the sensors could not detect, yet the human eye could. At first, officers dismissed it as stress. But then entire crews reported the same thing. Silent shapes drifting just far enough to remain untouchable. They moved with purpose, vanishing as soon as one tried to focus on them. They were there, watching, waiting. The admiral tightened his fists. He ordered the fleet to hold formation and press forward. The order was obeyed, but the silence from the crews revealed hesitation. Pride demanded movement, but fear whispered caution. For the first time in centuries, the Empire was not certain. The first real strike came without warning. A cruiser near the rear of the formation suddenly lurched sideways, its shields collapsing in an instant. No weapon fire had been detected, yet entire sections of the hull glowed red as if sliced by invisible heat. Then it fractured into 3 parts, silent in the void before vanishing from all sensors as though it had been swallowed. No distress signal escaped. The crew's last screams never reached their allies. Every Imperial officer turned pale. It was not just destruction. It was erasure. The kind of erasure that implied control far beyond anything they understood. The admiral ordered a counterstrike, demanding all ships open fire into the void. Hundreds of cannons roared, filling space with energy beams and missiles. The stars themselves seemed to vanish behind the storm. But when the weapons dimmed, there was nothing. Not even debris, only silence. And then the human ships revealed themselves. Not many, not even a full fleet. Only a handful appeared, their surfaces blacker than the void, shaped with edges that cut the eyes. They did not radiate power the way Imperial ships did. They did not display size or decoration. They were quiet, sharp, and utterly precise. And when they moved, they did so like predators, swift and controlled, no wasted motion. One Imperial captain tried to lock onto them with targeting systems, but his computers froze. Codes appeared across his screens in a language his crew did not understand. Lines of text scrolled faster than they could read. His ship's weapons disabled themselves one by one. The human vessel drifted closer, and then vanished in a blink, leaving only silence and terror behind. The admiral cursed under his breath. He had thought of humans as reckless children of war, loud and emotional. Instead, he saw now something far more dangerous. They were patient. They had waited in shadows, building tools the Empire could not see. They had turned their corner of space into a trap so carefully woven that the Empire had stumbled into it without realizing. Another squadron disappeared. Again, no explosions, no alarms, just absence. The remaining ships tightened their formation, but even that gave no comfort. Every time they tried to move in unity, The Terran vessels slipped between them unseen until too late. It felt less like a battle and more like a hunt. On a smaller vessel at the edge of the formation, a young officer dared to speak his fear. He whispered that perhaps the humans had never intended to match the Empire in numbers. Perhaps they had learned from history. Empires grew arrogant with size and power, but predators did not. Predators survived by precision, and Terrans, it seemed, had chosen to become predators of the stars. His words spread in whispers across the crews. Soon the thought infected every soldier. This was not war. This was ambush. The Admiral gave desperate orders to charge forward, to reach Earth itself and burn it down before these silent hunters could dismantle them, piece by piece. Engines roared and the fleet surged. Yet the further they pushed, the stranger the space became. Entire stars blinked out, replaced by nothing but black emptiness. Wormholes appeared where no records marked them. Distances stretched into infinity. Maps redrew themselves again and again until the navigators realized the horrifying truth. They were no longer certain where they were. The Terrans had not only cloaked their ships, they had rewritten the very canvas of space around them. The message returned. Calm, direct, merciless. You have crossed into forbidden space. This is your last chance to turn back. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, not from a single source. Every ship, every channel, every officer heard it directly in their ears. The Admiral gritted his teeth and silenced his fear. He commanded the fleet to fire everything at once, a last desperate attempt to prove the Empire's might. Weapons fired again, brighter than suns. But the void swallowed it all. Human ships emerged briefly, enough to be seen, enough to whisper terror, and then they disappeared once more. Imperial ships began to vanish one by one. Some flickered and tore apart, others simply dissolved. None escaped untouched. By the end of the hour, what had been the pride of the Empire was reduced to fragments. Survivors clung to disabled ships, praying for mercy that would not come. The Admiral himself stood frozen, unable to comprehend how an enemy so small had stripped his fleet of glory. The humans did not press further. They did not taunt, they did not boast. They simply waited, circling unseen, daring the survivors to move again. The Empire had crossed the line, and now they understood. The hidden edge of Terran space was not weakness waiting to be conquered. It was a blade waiting in silence. The hidden edge. The Galactic Empire had never known true silence in war. Their battles were filled with thunder, with the roar of cannons and the blaze of shattered worlds. Yet as their fleets pressed deeper into Sul, they found themselves caught in a war where the enemy did not scream, did not boast, and did not reveal themselves. The Terrans fought like phantoms, and the Empire could no longer tell where the battlefield began or ended. The first wave of the attack began with confusion rather than fire. Imperial ships lost entire power grids without warning. Lights dimmed, consoles shut down, and soldiers scrambled in the dark. Then when emergency power returned, they saw that 3 destroyers had vanished from the tactical map. Not destroyed, gone. No distress signals, no debris. Just erased from existence as though they had never been there. The captains demanded explanations, but the engineers only shook their heads, unable to explain how entire warships could cease to exist without a trace. It was then that they realized the humans were not attacking ships. They were attacking reality itself. Sensors displayed false readings. Ships believed they were flying in straight lines only to find themselves turned around, pointing back where they began. Entire formations drifted apart without realizing it. Officers barked orders, desperate to regroup, but their voices cracked with fear because they no longer knew if their words were reaching their own crews or the enemy who listened silently to every channel. One squadron broke away, panicked, trying to escape the madness. Their engines flared, and they pushed toward what they believed was open space. For a moment it seemed they would make it, that they had broken free of the invisible trap. Then every ship in that squadron erupted in blinding light. The explosion came not from outside but from within, as if their very hearts had been pierced. Survivors screamed across the channels before being cut short. In seconds, the squadron was dust. The Terrans had let them run only to end them in a single strike. The Admiral's voice thundered across the fleet, commanding order. He demanded his captains focus their firepower in coordinated waves, saturating entire regions of space. Beams and missiles tore through the void in every direction, filling the darkness with enough fire to burn entire worlds. For a moment, the admirals believed they had turned the tide. But the Terrans did not meet them head-on. They slipped between the cracks, ghost-like, striking when least expected. A frigate turned to pursue a faint shadow only to collide with its sister ship. Both vessels crumpled under the impact, fire spilling into the void. The humans had distorted their readings again, bending perception until allies could no longer trust their own eyes. Another cruiser unleashed its weapons in fury, only to strike one of its own carriers hidden by false signals. The carrier exploded and screams of betrayal echoed across comms. The Empire had always trusted their machines. Now the very tools of war betrayed them. Then for the first time a human voice came over the Imperial channels. Not the same warning voice, but calm, deliberate and cruel in its confidence. "You should not have come here," it said. Every Imperial crewman froze. It was not shouted, not barked. It was spoken like a truth too heavy to deny. And before anyone could respond, a wave of Terran ships emerged from the black, striking with impossible precision. Their weapons did not burn bright like the Empire's. They were cold beams, concentrated bursts that sliced hulls with surgical accuracy. They disabled engines, destroyed command bridges, and tore apart shield generators with merciless efficiency. They were not fighting to overwhelm. They were dismantling the Empire one piece at a time. The war had become a nightmare. Crews felt hunted rather than opposed. Every corridor of every ship echoed with the fear that any moment could be their last. The Empire's commanders barked orders louder, trying to drown the panic, but their voices no longer carried the weight of invincibility. They were prey, and they knew it. The Admiral watched his tactical display shrink by the minute as more ships were lost to unseen attacks. He slammed his fists on the console, demanding a direct assault on Earth itself. If they could not defeat the humans in shadows, perhaps they could still burn their homeworld and prove the Empire's strength. Engines surged and the fleet turned, charging deeper into Sol. But the further they went, the stranger the space became. Planets flickered in and out of vision, moons multiplied, then vanished. Even Earth itself appeared for a moment, only to dissolve into dust. The humans were not defending with ships alone. They were using the battlefield itself as a weapon. Entire realities bent and broke under their control. The Empire's greatest strength, their numbers, had become their weakness. Every additional ship was just another victim for the unseen hunters. The Admiral tried one last command: retreat. But the order came too late. Terran ships emerged from every angle, more numerous than the Empire had ever realized. They had been there all along, hidden beneath layers of deception, watching as the invaders stumbled deeper into their trap. One by one, Imperial ships winked out, consumed by fire, torn apart by precision strikes, or swallowed by distortions that no one could explain. When the guns finally fell silent, the Empire's fleet was nothing but fragments. Only a handful of broken survivors drifted in the void, their systems dead, their crews stunned into silence. They had entered Terran space believing in their own invincibility. They left it shattered, humiliated, and afraid, and through it all, the humans never shouted, never bragged. They spoke only once more, as their ships faded back into the shadows. "This is the unseen war," the voice declared. "You do not win it. You only survive if we allow it." The survivors trembled as the words burned into their minds. For the first time in their history, the Empire had fought an enemy that refused to play by their rules. Humanity had shown them a new kind of war, one fought in silence and shadows, a war the Empire could not understand, let alone control. The unseen war. News of the defeat spread across the stars faster than the wreckage of the fallen fleet could drift. In the grand chambers of the Imperial Council, the air was heavy and silence pressed like a weight upon the shoulders of every noble, general, and minister gathered. The walls were built to project confidence, vast pillars of black stone carved from conquered worlds, banners of gold and crimson fluttering with the symbols of victories long past. Yet tonight those symbols seemed hollow. The Empire's pride had been broken, and the chamber that once thundered with arrogant speeches now quivered with whispers of fear. The surviving fragments of the fleet had limped back, engines crippled and crews haunted. Officers who once stood tall in gleaming uniforms now trembled as they gave their reports. They spoke of ships vanishing into darkness without warning, of reality itself bending at the borders of Sol, of Terran ships that appeared like shadows and disappeared without leaving trace. They spoke of weapons that cut without fire, of voices that slipped into secure channels like knives through flesh, and of a message that had repeated again and again, forbidden space. The counselors did not want to believe it. They demanded proof. They accused survivors of cowardice, of lies spun to excuse their failure, yet no matter how loud the accusations grew, the hollow eyes of those survivors silenced them. No one who had returned carried pride. They carried fear, and fear was something the Empire had never seen in its own people. The Emperor's throne sat elevated above the chamber, his face hidden by shadow, but his silence screamed louder than any order. For centuries he had been the voice of domination, declaring wars that reshaped galaxies, demanding obedience from all who knelt beneath the banner. Now he listened, his hands clenched against the armrests, and said nothing. To speak too soon would be to reveal doubt. To stay silent was to let that doubt grow inside every mind. One general, desperate to hold on to the illusion of control, rose from his seat. He argued that the humans had mastered only trickery, that illusions and traps did not make them strong, and that if the Empire sent 10 fleets instead of 1, Terran resistance would collapse. His voice thundered across the chamber, yet even as he spoke, his hands shook. Others nodded, eager to cling to this fragile hope. But then another voice, sharp and bitter, cut across the chamber. 10 fleets will vanish as one has vanished, said an old admiral who had studied the battle reports with care. We faced not ships alone. We faced the manipulation of space itself. The Terrans fought us without fighting. They dismantled us without needing to break us in open battle. If you send 10 fleets, you will bury 10 fleets, and with each loss, the illusion of Empire's strength will die. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some shouted that fear was treason, that doubt was poison. Others whispered that perhaps the admiral was right. For centuries they had mocked Earth as backward, primitive, unworthy of notice, and yet this primitive world had taught them something the Empire could not understand. It had taught them that even the greatest could bleed. Reports continued to flow in. Scouts had been sent to the border after the battle and none had returned. Probes sent into Sol transmitted static before disappearing. Entire systems close to Terran space had gone silent, their colonies unreachable. It was as though the humans had woven a curtain around their realm, one that no eye could pierce. A counselor from one of the oldest noble families demanded retaliation. His voice broke with fury as he declared that to do nothing was to admit weakness. If we yield to Earth, we yield to rebellion. Every world will see that the Empire can be resisted. Every slave will dream of freedom. We cannot allow this. His words shook the chamber with the echoes of truth, for the Empire's power had always relied on fear, on the certainty that resistance was hopeless. If Earth destroyed that certainty, the galaxy itself would fracture. Yet another minister, cold and precise, countered with words that made the chamber colder still. And if we fight them again and fall, what then? The galaxy will not whisper of resistance, it will shout of the end of the Empire. The Council trembled not because of what Earth had done, but because of what Earth had revealed. The Empire's image of invincibility had cracked, and through the cracks poured questions they had never dared ask. What if the Empire was not eternal? What if the greatest force in the galaxy had finally met something it could not conquer? The Emperor finally rose. His shadow stretched across the chamber like a storm cloud. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries, yet even that weight could not bury the unease. The humans have declared their realm forbidden, he said. They believe themselves untouchable. We must decide whether to prove them wrong or to recognize a power new to this galaxy. His words left the chamber frozen. To admit humanity's strength would be to admit limits to the Empire's reach. To attack again would be to risk humiliation so complete that even history could not hide it. Both choices carried ruin. The counselors looked to each other, their faces pale, their pride bleeding away. Outside the chamber across the galaxy, rumors spread. Merchants whispered that the Terrans had defeated the Empire's finest. Soldiers murmured that a new power had risen. Colonies once bound in chains wondered if Earth's defiance meant their own freedom was possible. The tremors of doubt stretched far beyond the chamber, shaking foundations that had stood unbroken for ages. The Council continued to argue, voices breaking under fear, disguised as anger. Some demanded vengeance, others pleaded for caution, but all knew the truth. The Empire had changed the moment Earth had spoken, and no decision could undo it. The chamber shook not with war drums, but with uncertainty. The Council trembled not because they feared death, but because they feared something far worse, the loss of the illusion that had kept their empire alive. The Council trembled. The galaxy held its breath as Earth prepared to speak. Rumors spread faster than light, carried not only by traitors and spies but by the very survivors of the Empire's humiliation. What was once considered a small and backward planet had now risen as something untouchable, a shadow in the heart of the stars that no one dared to provoke. Yet the silence from the humans was not eternal. When they chose to speak, their words would be written across every world. The message came without fanfare, without warning, and without any traceable source. Across every known channel, from the palaces of noble lords to the dens of smugglers, a single transmission forced itself through. It was not accompanied by images or symbols, only the sound of a voice that carried no emotion and yet more weight than the roar of 1,000 fleets. This is not a request. This is the law of Terran space. The realm of Earth is forbidden. Any empire, any fleet, any trespasser will vanish. The words echoed across the galaxy, sinking into the minds of every listener. The Empire's council, already fractured by fear, froze in silence. The declaration was not a threat. It was not even a challenge. It was a simple truth delivered with such certainty that no one could mistake it for anything else. The humans had not asked for peace, nor had they demanded recognition. They had drawn a line, one final line, and dared the galaxy to cross it. The Emperor sat upon his throne, silent as the chamber trembled with outrage and terror. His generals shouted that the Terrans had gone too far, that to allow such arrogance was to unravel the very fabric of imperial dominance. Yet, even as they raged, none of them volunteered to lead a second invasion. None wanted to test the line that had been drawn. Pride demanded defiance, but survival demanded silence. In distant corners of the galaxy, the message carried a different meaning. Worlds long enslaved began to whisper of freedom. Colonies that had been crushed under the Empire's boots dared to hope. If Earth could defy the greatest power in the stars, perhaps others could too. Revolt stirred in the shadows, fueled by the echo of Terran words. It was as if a spark had been thrown into dry grass and the fire spread beyond anyone's control. Meanwhile, the survivors of the First Fleet lived as broken reminders of the truth. Their eyes were hollow, their voices weak. They spoke of ships that appeared and vanished like nightmares, of stars that bent and maps that lied, of weapons that silenced entire vessels without leaving trace. They whispered that Earth was not just a planet. It was a realm, a domain where the rules of war no longer applied. They were soldiers of the Empire, yet they feared the silence of the humans more than the roar of any battle. The Emperor finally rose, his cloak heavy with symbols of victories past, yet his presence no longer silenced the chamber as it once had. He declared that the Empire would not strike again for now. His words were carefully chosen, balancing pride and fear. He promised his people that the Empire would rebuild, would learn, would bide its time. But everyone in the chamber knew the truth hidden beneath his voice. The Empire had been forced to yield. Outside, in the darkness of space, Terran ships continued to move unseen, circling their borders like wolves guarding their territory. They did not pursue conquest. They did not seek to expand. They only defended, and in that defense they revealed a strength the galaxy had never respected until now. The Terrans had no need to invade, because their message alone had invaded the hearts of all who listened. Across the stars, alien rulers debated in fear. Some argued that Earth should be ignored entirely, that to even speak of them was to invite danger. Others wondered if alliances could be forged, if perhaps it was wiser to stand with the humans than against them. The galaxy was no longer united under fear of the Empire alone. A new power had entered the stage, and it had written its claim in fire and silence. On Earth itself, the people remained quiet. They did not celebrate with parades or grand declarations. Their leaders knew that silence was their greatest weapon. The galaxy would wonder, would doubt, would fear, and that fear would guard them better than any fleet. The humans had become the unknown, and in war the unknown was the deadliest of all.